the timber tall and green along the line. You can hear the magpies call and the crickets sing. These sounds the steel will join as the bush saws scrape and whine. You'll hear the echoes as our axes ring.
Bill Bunbury here with Something Unique, Something Majestic. Life in the Karri forests of Western Australia's southwest in the 1930s, a time before wood chippers and chainsaws changed the forests forever. For the timber communities of that pre-war era, the forests were more than just a way to make a living.
The Karri tree and the Karri forest, it's one of the most beautiful trees in the world, and the forest itself, particularly in the primeval forest and what we call the virgin forest, it had a cathedral-like atmosphere, somewhere where you felt entirely relaxed, and it's kind of a place you'd always want to come back to, and that's the way it affects me.
It's not easy to explain, but it's a way of life, living in the forest. It's having something around you that's not quite of this world, really. The trees are a living entity. They're something that's almost become like friends.
He roams the jarrah stands and forests set aside, selects his trees with loving care and pride. From the time dawn beckons him rise, a wealth in years of logging tell him the trees to cut and where to fell them. An eagle eye upon the bark reads the grain.
Well, you never learned falling unless you got with an experienced man, and that was the setup. If anybody got killed, left, well then you was taken out of the gang if you had your name down for a job falling, and you took his place.
In the Karri were that big that the fallers worked in pairs. A right-hander and a left-hander worked together, and you'd see them operating cutting a scarf in the tree. You know what I mean by a scarf? That's what they call in bushman's parlance putting the address on the tree, where you want the direction in which you wanted to fall the tree.
Well, there was quite a lot you had to know. Which way it was leaning, how big a scarf to put in it, things like that. You couldn't just tear in and fall it anywhere.
A tree marker had to be an experienced faller himself, and he would carefully note which way the tree, where its natural lean was, which natural fall. But if he decided, no, it can't go out there where it would naturally go, but I can swing it into that opening there, he'd mark it there, and the faller would have to go to a bit more trouble to lift it and throw it over in that direction so that he would not... there'd be minimum damage to the remaining stand of timber.
You wouldn't know where you're going to fall. I go sideways, anywhere at all.
And there was danger also in the falling of the trees. Even though you learnt to fall the trees, you might get... you worked under the trees, and there was always the prospect of wind bringing a limb down. We had men killed by limbs falling on them.
They have what they call in the bush widow makers, and they are dead branches that are in trees, and if a wind becomes high, they drop on men's heads, and there's been lots of people, their husbands have died through widow makers.
Well, 3 years ago I went out to see a faller out in Bunnings Bush out west of Manjimup, and the last tree he was to fall at night, there was a hanger from another tree hanging over his head. He was worrying about this damn thing all night, wondering, hoping that nobody would walk underneath it. And he went out, next limb came down and killed him as dead as a doornail.
He turns his back on home and leaves his wife behind him, takes the gravel track towards the forest winding, shouldering his old water bag. A good few hours and he's finally nearing a little campsite in the forest clearing, a home from home where he toils away.
For the most part you would be camped out some miles from the towns in a tent, and you worked no particular hours. You found your way out to the workplace and found your way home, and probably carried your food supplies for the week in many cases.
We had very poor variety and a lack of fresh vegetables very often. The cook's chief equipment in those days was a good strainer and plenty of vinegar, because when the meat's half stinking and you cook it, if you pour plenty of vinegar over it, takes the smell away. This is what we lived on. And for breakfast you'd have bacon. I never ate a bit of bacon for 20 years after I left that. Salt was bilio too, you know. And you'd start off the day spitting chips, thirsty as anything. And even though you're in the southwest, you'd go 3 miles and not get a running creek in the summertime.
Well, falling, you couldn't wear much clothes. Very little clothes. Probably a lot of people, just 2 flannel shirts, one tucked inside their belt and the other one hanging outside. And that was as good a protection against the weather as anything.
We used to go into the Jarrah country. We used to get pretty wet there too, but the rain is not all that bad. It falls in lumps more or less. I remember once the first camp I went on, we were camped on the Woolgarrup Bailing Up Road on the Bailing Up Brook, and we couldn't find a place to cross this brook. It was in flood, you know, in the middle of it. Well, it'd be about, on the road, it'd be about, I suppose, 30 feet across it, you know, and waist deep. And every morning, and most of our work was on the other side, we just had to lift up our, every man cut his own crib, and you had your crib rolled up in a bit of newspaper and put in a handkerchief, and you hung it on the back of your belt with a jam tin billy can and your tea and sugar. So we'd lift this up, you know, and just wade through this icy cold water up to your waist. But after you'd walked about a mile, you'd walk yourself warm again. We took that all in a stride.
They worked more or less together, the bullocks and the horses. Some people preferred horse teams, some preferred the bullock teams.
First they operated in teams of up to 16 bullocks, pulling what was known as a whim, a big 2-wheeled carriage, in which the log was picked up and conveyed to the landing, where it was loaded onto the trucks for the mill.
They were pretty hard and tough old fellas. They never mucked around. If the bullock wouldn't do what they wanted them to do, if the load was a bit heavy, well, they had to get stuck in them with a whip, or wave the whip mostly and shout and wave their arms and scream. Yeah, they could swear all right. Don't worry about that. Well, I was in the winter, see, it was a pretty hard job too. Mud up the bullocks' bellies, and well, you had to follow them all the way in and all the way out.
Well, one of the old chappies that had been associated with bulls all his life, and he owned these bullock teams, and when they mentioned about the tractors coming in, of course, even I don't think as anybody could visualise a tractor working in this bush. But when it was mentioned to him, and he had a very, a real old gruff voice, probably yelling out at bullock teams all his life, or at bulls, he said, "No way will tractors or that type of thing work on this bush," he said. "Moses had bulls and they'll always want bulls."
I never saw much of bullocks. They never impressed me very much, but they were good animals. I saw more of horses, but it was one of the romantic to see a man come in driving 4 pairs of horses. "Gee off, Nobby! Gee off, Nobby!" And old Nobby would swing over to the right. It was really something to see them handling a team of horses like that. And whim horses, they only had an average life of about 3 years. They used to get all sorts of things happen to them. When they're loading a log, for instance, often a horse got speared in the belly with a long stick, a green stick that might have been broken off a limb. The horse in front of him steps on it and lifts it up, and it runs into his belly. And his horses in front, you see, he'd be one of the back horses. And they're pulling him. He can't do anything about it. He can't pull away because they're pulling him into it.
I was very glad when tractors came in, because the horses, it was a cruel thing to go into these horse yards and see the shocking state of the horses, fistlows on their necks, great tears torn out in their shoulders. So, but they were a different kettle of fish altogether to the bullocks. But the bullocks did a marvellous job.
Oh, I don't think anybody regrets the passing of the bullock teams and the horse teams because of the terrific cruelty that the animals suffered in that time. Not only from the nature of the work they had to do, working in, say, the bullocks working in deep bog, and in the summertime working in dust, when animals breathing heavily and sucking in dust, particularly the horse teams I've seen doing this, and many horses, hundreds of horses have died just with their lungs being cut out by dust. And again, by inefficient or uncaring operators who operated them with bad harness and didn't feed them and so forth. No, I don't think anybody really could... sorry to see the passing of the bullocks and horses.
No more the sound of his stock whip. His team from the valley has gone. The cross-cut and axe are now silent, but the legend will live on and on.
But whether by bullock or horsepower, once the logs reached the landings, they still had to travel by bush railway to the ever-hungry mills.
Come on, Tom, bend your back, add a mile to the track, and a smile to the faces you feed. That old railway track snakes through the outback, and the forest where your axe rings so loud. On the sleepers you make, rest the rail held by plates, you're guiding the steam trains along.
Operating conditions for the railways in those days was terribly primitive and very hard and very dangerous. They worked on railway tracks that weren't permanent. They were constantly picked up and relaid, and as a consequence they were of a relatively poor quality. They were very rough, and there were many derailments. And I think very few people these days would believe the conditions under which bush railways worked at that time. To ride on the train was actually difficult to describe. It's like riding a bucking horse. You had to hang on to it. If you rode on the loco, you had to hang on to it, and the ride was pretty rough.
I would say, without fear of contradiction on that scale, that there was no lines anywhere rougher or conditions rougher than what there was on log hauling and on the bush tracks. There's no question about that. You completely ignored as far as the anything to do with the Machinery Act, otherwise you wouldn't have got to the bush or back. You broke all regulations, but they knew that you were doing that, and the type of work you had to keep going, and you had to get the logs in, otherwise the mill stopped.
Keep those logs rolling, boys, down to those logs are rolling down. And we'll push the crosscuts through just to show what we can do, and we'll pave all the streets of a London town.
Well, wherever the timber was, the line went. If you had the main line, you had so many spur lines, and it never made any difference about how steep it was. You had to get the timber out.
But the bush railways were also another kind of lifeline.
Yes, well, there was a story associated with that most of these mill towns where they had locos, they reckon the locos were responsible for the high birth rate, and it was brought about that the engines leaving in the morning at 5:30 at 6 usually used to blow the whistle to let the manager know that they were heading for the bush, and of course that used to wake everybody up. And the mill never used to start work till 8 o'clock, and the story was it was too early to get up and too late to go back to sleep.
you got pretty lonely out there, you know, and you saw the same old faces and you got sick and tired of reading the labels on the jam tins. But there was always something happening in a mill, you see, and there was men and women, and I got to know some of the families, and it was a real treat to go into a home where there was a woman and, you know, the womanly, homely atmosphere and a little child. And of course, I was the eldest of a family of 6, and I was sort of used to that sort of thing. And of course, we had our, for the football team, we used to organise dances, and plenty of dances was the main form of recreation we had.
We had a hospital ball every year, and everybody cooked, made cakes and cooked chickens and whatnot, and we used to have a most fantastic supper, 4 sittings of supper. It used to go on all night. Sometimes they'd have 2 non-stop orchestras. And but anyway, Doctor used to go around collecting the cakes, and of course everywhere he went he had a little drink. and by the time we were ready for the ball at night, he'd be, you know, just so happy.
It was a marvellous experience, though, dancing, and the people, it was, everybody brought their kids, and there was babies and grandmothers and grandfathers there, and the old people generally sat down and talked, and they all brought blankets and things for the kids and plenty of food, and they slept there. The band would be going, or the old accordion.
The sense of community was outstanding. I couldn't call it anything else. Notably, if anyone was sick or had sick children, there were always people on the doorstep to do their washing, their cleaning, look after their children, take care of them in every way. And I found this something quite incredible after living in a city for all my life until then.
Well, it was so vast. The trees were so big, and we had never been in the country before, and we loved it. You know, we could walk in the bush, and I still love the bush. And we went to school at Dean Mill. From 8 miles from Dean Mill, we walked into school, my brother and my sister and myself. And eventually, we used to go walk to school, and then in the afternoon, when the mill train was going out to pick up the logs, they used to blow the whistle, and we were allowed out of school to get a ride home to within a mile of our own home every afternoon, and we liked that too. We'd hang on the side of the engine.
They had a quiet life. They had no tension or anything at all like that. They did manual work, and when they come home, they would just sit there and read the paper, and they never wanted any relaxer tablets. When it got dark, down they went.
Today, a chainsaw can take out a 400-year-old carry in 10 minutes, as they have everywhere in Australia. But the Carry Forest is an important resource. But there's more than one way of looking at a resource, at least for the people who've lived and worked there and have seen the forest change.
I say, yes, it's certain with that original.
We're the same, and over we go. No, I love the trees, love the forest, but as I say, they're put on the earth for a use, and if we don't use them, they're just going to fall down, rot. If you've seen the timber that I've seen in the bush, wasted, just blown over and left there.
You feel it's a living thing that is gone. You felt something was dying every time you saw a tree fall.
I'd like to see them all left standing, but we know this is not practicable. We've got to use them, and provided we use them properly, I think that there's no great harm to be done, but I'm afraid that we don't always use things, not only trees, but we don't always use things to the best advantage in the world. So sometimes you see use made of them which you prefer not to see.
I feel there's something that's unique, there's something majestic about them, and I feel that they're not really, what shall I say, appreciated as much as they should be.
You get in the middle of, deep in the forest, and you look around, you just can't imagine how the rest of the world can behave like it does.
That was Something Unique, Something Majestic, pre-war memories of Carry and Jarrah country in southwest Australia. You heard the voices of Charlie and Jessie Tozier, John Thompson, Ron Meldrum, Kathleen Fuchs, Jessie Coleman, Leah Wheatley, Roy Kelly, Maurice Battolini and Olive Robinson. Songs were recorded at the Old Jardie Mill with the West Australian Bush Orchestra. Technical production, Edo Brands, Graham Boyd and Peter Burnett. I'm Bill Bunbury.
They found him there in the morning, his story well told on his face. The spirits that haunt the old wind track had gathered the last of his race. The spirits that haunt the old wind track had gathered the last of his race.